Hello, I have got chapter 16 of Barnaby Brocket. So do you remember yesterday? He was in Canada. He had got in the taxi after flying there with Charles, but then he realised he didn't have any money, and so the taxi driver said he had to leave the taxi, and so he was just on the street in Canada with no money. So, chapter 16 is the little jelly that caused so much trouble. Before Barnaby could even think what to do next, a great crowd started to sweep along the street towards him. There were hundreds of people all wearing identical blue and white shirts with a large A in the centre. He fell among them, clutching his rucksack firmly on his back as they passed the harbour front on the left before taking a sharp right turn, whereupon the entire throng began to pour into an enormous sports stadium with an open roof. As the fans dispersed to different parts of the arena, Barnaby found an empty seat at the end of a row and looked up towards the magnificent tower that stood next to the stadium, its great spire pushing up into the sky above. Barnaby had always loved sport, although he'd never once been taken to a football match. Eleanor said that normal people did not want to have their afternoon spoilt by a little boy floating out of his seat and obstructing their view. So he usually only got to watch it on television, trying to keep track of the action as he lay pressed against his mattress on the living room ceiling. As the stadium began to fill up, Barnaby pulled a postcard out of his rucksack and started to write. He was only halfway through when a family squeezed past him and took the next 3 seats. 2 enormous parents and a rather skinny little boy of around Barnaby's age. All 3 were carrying so much food, great cartons of popcorn, a couple of dozen hot dogs, litres and litres of fizzy drinks, bags of chocolates and sweets, that Barnaby feared they might explode if they ate it all. He put the unfinished postcard in his back pocket, trying not to stare at them. "Don't you have anything to eat?" asked the boy sitting next to him, and Barnaby shook his head. "I don't have any money," he said. "Well, you can have some of mine if you want," said the little boy, pushing some food Barnaby's way. "I'll never eat it all anyway. My parents always buy way too much. They think there's something wrong with me because I'm so skinny. My name's Wilson Wendell." "I'm Barnaby Brocket," said Barnaby, happy to take a carton of popcorn, some hot dogs, a bag of jellies, and a huge 4-litre container of something black, cold, and sweet that he sucked through a straw, and which sent a fizzy sensation through his body. In fact, the food was so heavy that Barnaby thought it might be safe to take his rucksack off, and he placed it under his feet. "Eat your dinner, Wilson," said the boy's mother as she dug into the bottom of a bucket of popcorn for a finger coating of salt. "You're fading away," said the father, licking the ketchup and mustard mixture that had spilled onto the hot dog wrapper. "I am eating," said Wilson, putting a single piece of popcorn in his mouth and chewing it carefully. "I hate all this junk," he added in a whisper, turning to Barnaby. "They won't be happy until I look just like them." "Well, you can't eat like this all the time," agreed Barnaby, enjoying every bite. "But when you're hungry like I am—" "You have a funny accent," said Wilson, interrupting him. "What's the matter with your voice?" "Nothing," said Barnaby. "I'm Australian." "I have an aunt who lives in Melbourne," said Wilson, "although I've never been there. Is it true that the water in the toilet goes the wrong way round there?" "It depends what you think the right way is, I suppose," said Barnaby. Wilson thought about this and gave a little grunt of agreement. "Who's your favourite football player?" he asked after a moment. "Kieran Jack," said Barnaby, who had watched the number 15 play dozens of times on television and had a poster of him on his bedroom wall. "I'm a Sydney Swans man." "Never heard of him," said Wilson. "Never heard of them either." "Well, he's only the greatest footballer in the history of the world," said Barnaby. "I like Cody Harper," said Wilson, pointing down at the team that had just run out onto the field to massive cheers from the crowd. "The greatest kicker of the Argonauts have ever had." "Which one's he?" said Barnaby. "Number 7, said Wilson. "Although he's having a rotten season, the fans all want the manager to drop him. Not me, though. I know he'll come good one of these days." "What the—" A great groan from the crowd as the sky suddenly opened and the rain began. There was a great heaving sound, and the motors on either side of the open roof kicked into gear to close it. Barnaby looked up in disappointment. He quite liked being able to gaze up at the tower looming over them. "That's where all the tourists go," said Wilson, seeing where Barnaby's eyes were focused. "They take the elevator to the top, then walk out onto a glass floor and look down over the city. One more jelly, I think," he added, reaching into the bag of sweets that was sitting on Barnaby's lap and picking out the smallest, most delicious-looking jelly. It couldn't have weighed more than a gram, but it must have been the difference between balancing Barnaby and unbalancing Barnaby, because the moment Wilson took it, Barnaby felt that familiar floating feeling begin to overtake him, and his legs started to rise off the ground. "Uh-oh," he said, reaching down for his rucksack, but either he'd pushed it too far back under the seat or he'd already risen too high because he couldn't grab it, and before long he was airborne. "Fantastic!" cried Wilson as the rest of the crowd, even those on the field, turned to look up at Barnaby. Ignoring the commotion, Cody Harper scored a quick goal, his first in ages, but as no one witnessed it, it didn't count. And Barnaby's unfinished postcard fell out of his pocket and landed in Wilson's lap. Barnaby heard the roar of the crowd and waved down to them, but their cheers soon turned into gasps, for as he rose higher, so the two sides of the roof were closing in on each other. There were only three things that could happen now. The first was that it would close before he had reached the top. The second was that Barnaby would make it through before they met. The third, which is the worst option of all, was that it would close just as he got there, and Barnaby would be sliced in two. And unfortunately for him, that's exactly what happened. Don't worry, it didn't. For just at that moment, when the two halves were about to seal the stadium, Barnaby slipped through the small gap that remained, a gap only big enough for an 8-year-old boy, and found himself looking down on the sky dome from outside, the white roof growing smaller beneath him as he rose. "Help!" he shouted, waving his hands towards the tourists in the tower. They all waved back as if this was just another entertainment laid on for them by the Mayor of Toronto. A small viewing platform at the top came into sight, and Barnaby noticed a black-suited figure running up the stairs inside and pulling open the door. He was carrying what looked like a fishing rod and casting it out into the air. It blew around in the wind, and Barnaby realised that it wasn't a fishing rod at all, it was a whip. "Grab hold of it!" shouted the man, and Barnaby pushed himself as hard as he could to the right as he reached out for it, catching it by his fingertips and holding on tightly as the man dragged him over the top of the rail and immediately sat on top of him so he couldn't float away. "Thank you," said Barnaby, looking up in relief. "You're welcome," said the man, looking at the boy as if he wanted to eat him whole. "I saved your life, young man. That means it belongs to me now." Barnaby stared at him in surprise. "Just kidding," he said, smiling in a rather nasty way, and the tone of his voice made Barnaby think that he wasn't kidding at all. After a moment, the man stood up, pulled the boy to his feet, and they went inside. Barnaby felt less than comfortable because the man had locked arms with him and was holding him very tightly so he couldn't escape even if he wanted to. "What a trauma for you," he said, shaking his head. "Let's get you some water, shall we?" "I'm fine," said Barnaby, thinking of all the planes in Toronto preparing to fly to the southern hemisphere. "I should be going, really." "Nonsense," said the man. "Where would you be going?" "Home, of course," said Barnaby. "And where's home?" "Sydney, Australia." The man smiled. "You're not from Toronto?" he asked. "No, and could you let go of my arm, please? You're hurting me." There's a picture of Barnaby catching hold of the whip to pull him back to the tower. "Oh no, I couldn't do that," said the man. "You might float away on me again, and we can't have that, can we? I told you, your life belongs to me now." "But you said you were kidding." "And I am still kidding," said the man with a nasty smile. He had a very pale face, greasy dark hair, and was dressed in what looked like a black tuxedo with red ribbing on the lapels. He made a funny cracking motion with his wrist, and the whip that he had used to reel Barnaby in rolled up perfectly, as he returned it to a pouch beside his leg. "Why do you carry a whip with you?" asked Barnaby. "It's part of my job. You've been to the circus, I presume?" "No," said Barnaby, shaking his head. Alistair wouldn't let him go to the circus when it came to Sydney, for much the same reason that Eleanor wouldn't let him go to football matches. But I've seen one on television. "Well, I work in a circus of sorts," explained the man. "A very special type of circus. I mean, we don't have lions or tigers or clowns, nothing like that." "Then what type of circus is it?" asked Barnaby. "Oh, that would be telling, wouldn't it? Now here," he said, opening a small bottle of water that he was carrying in his inside pocket and handing it across to Barnaby. "Drink this, why don't you? You'll feel better for it after all your excitement." "But I'm not thirsty," said Barnaby, "and I haven't had any excitement." "Drink it," repeated the man, and something in his tone made Barnaby feel that he'd better do as he was told, or there might be trouble ahead. And so he lifted the bottle, put it to his lips, and swallowed it all in one go. It tasted like regular water, only with a sort of sweet aroma and a bitter aftertaste, so actually nothing like regular water, really. "Good boy," said the man, smiling again as he returned the empty bottle to his inside pocket. "Now, let's just wait a moment or two, and then we can be on our way." Barnaby nodded and started to yawn. He was getting tired now. "I'll just wait a moment," he thought. "Then I'll thank the man for saving me and be on my way." But as he thought this, his eyelids grew even heavier. His legs started to feel like jelly, and his head grew dizzy. He thought he was going to collapse onto the table, but before that could happen, the man picked him up and threw him over his shoulder. The last thing he heard before he fell into a deep sleep was the man's voice calling, "Out of my way, please, my son has fallen ill," as he ran down the tower steps, circling over and over, until all of Toronto seemed to disappear into a sort of dream world, a place that Barnaby could not have awoken from, even if he'd wanted to. Oh dear. So, doesn't sound like that man is a friend of Barnaby's, does it? Now, here's another postcard there. That was obviously the one that he was in the middle of writing. So it says, "Dear family, I've made it to Toronto, and later today I have a seat on a plane flying to Sydney, so hopefully I won't be much longer getting home. If my copy of David Copperfield has arrived, can you put it on my bed, please? I don't want anyone reading it and breaking the spine. I'm at a ball game at the minute, and there's an open roof, although it looks like it might rain. I wanted to tell you that," and that's where it finishes. So obviously he didn't get a chance to finish his postcard, did he? So we will have the next chapter tomorrow, hopefully. So see you then.